morning, and what a privilege it is to be here speaking to you today at this amazing event. A couple of really hard acts to follow. I thought Steve Goog's was absolutely off the charts, and hearing about what's happening in academia around AI right now as we speak is just mind-blowing. So I am the General Manager for Digital, Technology, Strategy, and Innovation. And what that basically means is that I spend most of my life in large rooms with smart people nodding as if I have any idea what they're talking about. Now, being from a bank and being just after lunch, we run the risk of this session being a little dry. So I thought, let's play a little game. I managed to pry a couple of gift vouchers from the cold, tight hands of my CFO. And when I put together my slideshow, every single slide, or most of the slides, are going to reflect a scene from a movie or a theme from a movie. And I'll pause at every slide, and the first person to guess it gets a gift voucher. My two able assistants, Justin and Elliot, where is Elliot? Elliot should be upstairs. Will deliver your prize by hand for the people who correctly guess those particular slides. So without further ado, you up for it? Yeah, little game? Yeah, let's go. Let's go. So, Hitchhiker's Guide, who said that? Yes, nicely done, the gentleman in the front. This conference celebrates one of the most exciting technologies to become viable since fire, the wheel, running water, the internet, and maybe just pretty much forever. But it would be a fallacy to think that this is a recent phenomenon. In fact, the first conversations around AI go as far back as the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 1950s. Now, a piece of advice I give virtually everyone I have the chance to preach at, mainly my 10-year-old daughter, I give them the advice to read as much science fiction as you can if you're interested in the future, because science fiction is the reflection of the thoughts of the smartest people of a generation about those concepts that they can't present in formal academic sessions, lest they be laughed out of the room. The list of luminaries includes people Arthur C. Clarke, the man who gave us 2001: A Space Odyssey, Philip K. Dick, who gave us Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and each of these movies and books specifically had very strong themes around the rise to power and the control exerted by eventually sentient machines. Here it is, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the very first time that we truly embraced the concept of a machine taking control of our lives in every aspect, from looking after the health of our traveler to looking after his entertainment and the general management of all the ship systems around him. Until at a particular point, our traveler starts to resent the control exerted by the HAL 9000. This movie was made in 1968, which was the height of the first AI resurgence, or the first AI excitement. And at the time, studies were being done at Dartmouth, funded by the government grants. And a seminal quote of the time was from a guy called Harold Simon, an economist, who said, "Within 10 years, a digital computer will be the world's chess champion." Think about it, 10 years from early 1950s, 1952, I believe that quote was. Did we have that by 1962? We didn't have it by 1972 either. In fact, after 17 years of struggle and producing nothing other than a whole bunch of theory, eventually those government grants were pulled and we entered what is known as the first great AI winter. And that winter dragged on and on and on. Fortunately, in parallel, computing systems were growing, although they weren't learning machines. So we got systems such as expert systems, knowledge-based systems, and we were learning a whole bunch of ancillary skills that would eventually make true AI a possibility for us. And one of them was the fact that being able to act intelligent requires a whole bunch of contextual knowledge about the environment within which you are required to act intelligent. And if I take you back to my quip right at the beginning of how I spend most of my days, that proves to be true. Context is very, very useful. In the 1980s, the Japanese government went on another AI spree, and they funded a team to create a natural language processing machine. Again, great excitement, lots of learnings around the learning machine, but sadly, within 10 years, it was no more. The second great AI winter. Wow. Fortunately, researchers are a massively resilient bunch. So in the background, and specifically in this case at Carnegie Mellon, teams were frittering away, studying this thing that could eventually become the learning machine that could take us into the future. This drew the attention of IBM, who bought the entire team from Carnegie Mellon, and lo and behold, in 1997, Deep Blue emerged and beat Garry Kasparov at chess. Just like that. The floodgates opened, and it felt like machines were going to take over the world. Not that long ago, Stanford University beat the DARPA challenge. That was in 2005. Watson won Jeopardy in 2011, and AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol at the top AlphaGo player at the time, or the top Go player at the time, in 2015. Wow. Where to now? Is this the end of us? Wow. But before any of this stuff, Hell himself said it, and he said to Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave. That machine over there, what a beauty. That is a General Electric's GE225. And a very similar machine to this was Westpac's very first computer. Installed in 1965 in what is today the Radisson Building in Sydney. This machine's entire job in life was to process checks. The processor cabinets were as big as 3 wardrobes, and the entire 9th floor of what is today the Radisson Building was taken up by the storage units and the wiring to look after this machine. A total of core memory of 20K looked after the entire bank of the day. It quite quickly became apparent that this was a very useful tool, and within 2 or 3 years, 2 more of these machines had been bought and installed, one in Melbourne, one in Brisbane, and not long thereafter in Perth. And it was a very exciting time. Computers had come to serve us, not to rule us. It was also the birth of what is today known as the legacy or the heritage that most large organizations deal with. In 2017, or last year, Accenture and HFS Research did a study, and in their study of large enterprises around the world, 51% of those organizations have more than half of their computing power today running on legacy systems. More than 51%. And over half of those have plans to try and replace those systems within the next 2 to 3 years. No one is going to get this one. I'll keep this one. Right, this is a movie from 1936. Some of you may have seen it at the matinee, I think, yeah, the premiere. This movie is called Things to Come. And it's one of the earliest references I could find of the concept of you can have that one, Justin, of a sentient mind which rules and controls civilization of the day, 1936. So let's talk about this legacy debt problem that large organizations face. Why should you care? Well, entire industries today are run according to the process of daily, weekly, and monthly batches, which means that for an age and a civilization where we expect everything to be in real time all the time, most often we're facading those answers to give you the right customer experiences. But in the background, those systems are still running overnight batches to settle transactions, to reconcile books and the like. And we've done a reasonably good job at shielding people from this particular complexity. Now, to give you an estimate of the scale of this kind of processing, today in the United States, over $3 trillion a day is processed in the language of COBOL on batch-driven business systems. $3 trillion a day. In fact, COBOL, the language of these large machines, it's about 60 years old now, represents 70% of all code written ever. 70%, more than 2/3 of all code. Now, why is this a problem? Well, COBOL is not a skill that's taught in universities anymore. And yet 2/3 of the world's logic and 2/3 of the world's processing power is behind that particular code. But what's the benefit of these systems? Well, they're now becoming cheaper by transaction because we're processing huge transaction volumes. They're massively stable. And the downside is that they're hugely scary to change. Alistair Newton, a vice president at Gartner, was quoted as saying, legacy systems brought us scale and stability in big banks, but now they need speed and flexibility. So all must be lost. All must be lost. Let's give up now. Or rather, let's enter the robots. iRobot, 2004. So as much as this legacy debt problem feels like it's insurmountable, we can in fact fix it. And the way to fix this is to focus on what our purpose is in society and in the economy. Now, our purpose is quite simple. Our purpose is to enable our customers to financially grow so that in the end we end up with a stronger economy and a stronger New Zealand. And as long as we blind ourselves to the fact that way in the back room, far away from our customers, are these machines that don't quite process the way we want them to, as long as we focus on that, that's as long as we are not focusing on those things we need to create for a better banking experience for everyone. So our mantra leads us to make sure that every single thing that we do is led from the requirement of the customer's experience backwards. Now, what are some of the techniques that we're using to mitigate the effect of these legacy technologies? Well, here come the robots. Firstly, judicious use of front-to-back robotic process automation, taking away the complexity and the risk from repetitive processes so that we can free humans up to not have to do those things the same way over and over. How about the use of sophisticated rules engines and eventually the application of machine learning and AI so that decisions become more logical and more consistent, so that we can be informing smart people in the front line rather than trying to just automate those processes mechanically. And lastly, wrapping APIs around as much as we can possibly find so that when we do need to expose the processes in the back ends, we don't have to expose ecosystems, other systems and partners to the complexities that live within those siloed back-end systems. McKinsey estimates that the combination of AI and process automation essentially is the new operating system. And I'm going to read these off for you, that more than 50 to 70% of all human tasks will be automatable by the combination of AI and robotics within the next 5 years. 50 to 70%, that's a staggering number. These represent, in their estimation, a 20 to 35% operational efficiency or operational cost gain, and a reduction in straight-through processing times of between 50 and 90%, depending on what the processes are. And for my CFO, which is how I managed to prise the envelopes out of his hands, this represents a triple-digit improvement in our cost-to-income ratio and in profitability for organizations. Imagine that, triple digits. Wow, that's off the chart. It's like a Ponzi scheme. You guys are on the ball today. Here's another one of our challenges, is that cyber and financial crime is growing at a rate that has never been seen before. And the ubiquitous access to the internet, cloud scale, and as many of the smart tools as you can shake a stick at, to criminals, means that we are no longer dealing with script kiddies. We're no longer dealing with someone who has a weekend obsession with causing mischief. Large, organized cabals of smart engineers leveraging the very best technologies that they can find to try and break in and steal that which our core mission is to protect. Our core mission is to keep a safe and trusted environment for your money, for your future, and for our economy. The challenge is that we're playing Go not against one opponent, not against one grandmaster. We're playing Go against virtually all comers, and we're doing it all at the same time. So there can be only one logical response, and that is for us to be employing a similar tool set, a learning tool set, for ourselves against these various threats as they come. And it's one of the most compelling current use cases for the use of, or the application of machine learning and AI in the detection of fraud, in the combating of cybercrime, and is a reality for us today. I have a fantastic quote from this movie, which actually fits in quite nicely. Agent Smith, why, Mr. Anderson? Why do you do it? Yeah? War games. Every year, hackers and cyber terrorists generate over 130 million new variants of viruses and malware and release them into the wild. At some organizations, at the grand scale, at the group scale, ours is not that different. Some organizations employ over 2,000 cybersecurity professionals to maintain a 24-hour rolling watch and a rolling response to the threats that these people represent. Now, here in New Zealand, we have neither the scale nor the funding to be able to run such a response. And yet, how can we afford not to? And the answer is in the force multiplier that comes from us applying smart learning, machine learning, and AI to the mass volumes of data and of logging that is generated by the activity coming into us. I won't give too many more stats around the cyber environment, but suffice it to say that there is not a single day that goes by that we don't thank ourselves for having invested in those tools. Yeah, no, that's not a movie. That's not a movie. Let's get back to why we're here. We said earlier our purpose here is to make your financial lives easier, to help you grow financially, to create the environment where we together can be a stronger country. And we do that by creating great customer experiences, great access to your own money and to your financial life. And over many years, all of us have been investing heavily in nice platforms, in nice apps, in nice websites, and frankly, they're quite pleasant to work with. But the bar has shifted to where today, when you go into these platforms, no longer are you being given access to your money, no longer are you being given transactional information. But that information is being enriched, is being processed, is being contextualized for you as you navigate through the various platforms. So our job eventually is to come up with that sweet spot where your interaction with your financial life is in fact seamless and effortless, where your need would be to own a home, your need would be to create or to buy transport or to send someone to university. It won't be to get a loan or to get a mortgage. And we would be there for you to be able to satisfy that outcome seamlessly. Now, interfaces are an interesting thing in that we all have many of them. And the original interface, if you think about it, is in fact the branch. And branches have been around for us for 150 some years. And you would think that we're staring the imminent demise of branches in the face. But there are some very interesting studies. Iron Man, yeah, well done. Now, the problem of many comes to the fore, where we've created so much optionality in the number of ways in which we can interact with various parts of our lives, and banks are a great example. And each of them has slightly different rules. So it almost feels like we spend a large portion of our lives learning the navigation of the various routes and access mechanisms for each of the organizations we deal with. We've spent our lives learning how to navigate the machines, and our hypothesis says that now is the time when it's the machine's turn to start learning how best to serve us. And that leads us to our first foray into AI-supported customer interaction is our smart bot called Wes. Now, Wes has been around for a while, and it's been a fantastic learning experience for us. But our strategy around Wes is not to create a chatbot. Our strategy around Wes is for it to be a smart and intelligent way that we can have him in your life when you need him. Hey, Wes, I need to transfer some money, as opposed to have to go to him or her. And that we can give you access not only to the deep data that we have about your financial history and about your financial life, but enrich that with your current context on the internet. So that when Wes reaches out to you, he's not reaching out to you with a dumb product advertisement. What he's doing is he's saying, hey John, hey Joel, I can see X, Y, and Z. Here are some suggestions as to how we can help you get to that outcome. So Wes for us is not a toy. Wes is a core part of that strategy of binding together all the capabilities in your financial life so that they can be navigated by you seamlessly and without you having to focus on them. So that's the front end. What about the middle of the bank? In the middle of the bank, we have the problem of individuals having to deal with really complex conversations and having to scroll around and find the information to help you. Another great use case and another one of the samples that we're working on right now is to say, what would happen if we can put an intelligent assistant in the hands of the person who is speaking to you or the person that is right in front of you? And advice, do I hear you say? What about advice? What is robo-advice? Well, the world of wealth products is nothing more than a series of complicated puzzles, and each of those puzzles with 100 parameters. And when you overlay your own needs and your own aspirations over that, you can understand that quite quickly individual human advisors are singularly unequipped to come up with the optimal answer for you. Now, robo-advice today, there are a couple of great showcases. One of them is an organization called Betterment, another one is an organization called Wealthfront, and each of them have respectively 6.5 billion New Zealand dollars and 10 billion New Zealand dollars under management today, entirely served via robo-advice. Now, for a sense of scale, in our BT fund today, we manage $10 billion. So I can assure you that we're watching this space really, really carefully, because the second it becomes a viable thing and a trusted thing, that is the right direction for us to go so that we can support you with the optimal decisions based on the mass data sets. It is in fact Minority Report. Why continue to invest in humans? Well, our own research over the last couple of years has shown something quite startling, and it's supported by an Accenture study where they spoke to 33,000 individual financial service clients, asking the simple question, at what points would you prefer to speak to a human? And the answer to that is actually simple. There are two specific instances where we want to know that we're dealing with someone who has empathy, context, and understanding of what we're feeling, not necessarily of what we're trying to achieve. The one is at the point where we need to make a new or complex financial life decision. Sort of makes sense, right? Until you then start thinking through what does a complex decision represent for people in different life stages or with different current needs. Turns out, one of our hypotheses was that no millennial would ever want to speak to a human. Well, it turns out that when you're young and you've just left school or you've just left uni, the decision about where to buy your first home or how to set up a first savings account or a first trust or a first mortgage is actually a complex decision. Whereas for us who've done it many times, it probably isn't. For those of us who have started a business, the idea of financing that business for the first time is quite complex. But if you're a serial entrepreneur, turns out it's not that hard. So the simple answer is that it's going to be a long time before we're able to take humans out of every single interaction. The second time that you want to speak to a human is when you have to deal with something that hasn't gone quite right. How many of you have phoned a complaints line and you get put into the IVR? We have an IVR. And you spend that time navigating the complexities of the IVR when all you really want is you just want to hear that one friendly voice that says, "How can I help you?" Interesting. Accenture reckons that 71% of banks today, of over 700 banks surveyed, believe that AI is ready to be at the front of customer interactions. We believe the same thing. And to quote Steve Guggenheimer from earlier, AI is here, but it's not ready to be all things. But it's also too late for us not to be trying it. And that's the space that we find ourselves in. In those 700 banks, more than half of them in their investment portfolios in the next year are seeing investments in embedded AI solutions, as are we. Computer vision, as are we. Machine learning, as are we. Natural language processing, and robotic process automation. You heard the McKinsey quote earlier, it's the new operating system. Who said passengers over here? I heard it. There we go. Back corner, passengers. Good. Well done. Well done, well done, well done. So in answering the hard question, because your mind should be going, if the extreme is automating more than 70% of all processes, what does that mean for us? And for us at Westpac, the answer is that we don't see the future as being a conversation of man versus machine. We see this as being a conversation of man plus machine. So our drive is to extend all of our technology and all of the smart support that we can give humans today as far into the corners of our bank as we can. The promise of computing from the 50s and the 60s and of AI today is the ability for us to relieve humans from doing mundane, repetitive things and to allow them to focus on those sweet points of interaction where being human is the killer app. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dawie. And it's always good to know that we still need humans. And I like that they used the word killer, but without the AI context. That's good. Perfect. So we go from big corporate companies now. You've got 3 minutes left.
I do.
Do you know what that means?
I did well. Yeah,
we get to do
time.
question time.
That's why I'm here.
Amazing. Okay. So first of all, you talked about millennials still wanting to interact with people. Are you seeing a real shift in how customers use banking tools, for example, and are you having to develop different systems for different types of clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So our range of platforms is everything from a pure transactional platform all the way to the insights style of platform with CashNav. And the demographics of popularity across those platforms is distinctly different. If I speak to someone like my dad who's been around financial services all his life, all he really wants is he wants to know that the payment that he's made has arrived, and that's it. Whereas for youngsters and folks leaving university who are starting a new life, who are much more financially responsible than I ever was, the insight about what am I spending money on and how is that helping me towards my savings goals or not is actually absolute gold. So there is a very definite demographic difference between how those styles of interaction play out.
Let's talk about money. So I grew up in a generation where money was a thing, right? And when you had money in your pocket, it jingled. There's a generation now that literally taps and goes. And so how do we make sure that with all of this new technology that there's still an appreciation of the value of things? Or maybe do younger people just have a different type of value around money?
So I have a 10-year-old, so I'm probably quite uniquely qualified to speak, although she'll probably disagree. And the fact is that for her, the value is not yet in the money itself, but it's in the experiences that she gets to have because of it. And I think that's a great shift in how we do value money in general, but certainly savings and wealth over the years is that for us it was all about having the nest egg and protecting the financial future, safeguarding our things. Whereas for my daughter and her friends, it's about what are the amazing experiences I can build up to into my future as I do put away a little bit every month.
So let's go into the future a little bit. AI versus, you talked a little bit about applying for mortgages. Housing is a really interesting issue. So what about conversion data so we can look at what we predict house prices to be and what we predict our future income might be, and maybe delegating a mortgage based on those things versus what my current situation is?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are actually two factors to that. So the predicting is not that hard. The projection models are actually quite mature today. One of the key frustrations for most customers, and myself included, is that sometimes when you're dealing with your bank, it doesn't feel like your bank knows you. It doesn't feel like your history with that organization carries the amount of weight or value that it probably should. And this is one of our core focuses right now, is to say, how do we take both the future, the past, and the present requirement into account when we tailor that offer specifically to you?
Final question. You must see a whole bunch of technologies that the consumer doesn't see. Now, I was involved in a Westpac Google Glass day where I got to control my bank account with Google Glass, which looked like it was going to be a thing, and then who knows what happened. So how many technologies do we not see that you are working on that you're excited about?
Well, one of my favorite portfolios is the ventures portfolio, and the short answer to that is virtually all of them. I found out to my horror the other day that we had created we actually had a Bitcoin mine in the office. Which was interesting in itself.
Where the electricity was going.
Yeah, that's right. And you're like, wow, our utilities bill's gone off the charts. But the fact is that we have a very active program of trying as many of these things as we can. So everything from AR to VR to coin mining is in our environment virtually all the time. At the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know when you're trying to solution things. And the reason we used to come up with fairly chunky answers to questions was because that art of the possible wasn't always present in our solutioning.
Cool. So you're saying I can soon store my Bitcoin in my Westpac account. Is that what you're saying? Darn it. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please give Dawie a big thank you.